Welcome to the New Left and the American Counterculture Movement. In your last two social studies units, you learned about the Red Scare and the Cold War. America had seemingly distanced itself from the leftist political movements shaking up European politics. That is, until the Vietnam War. On your tables, you should have found and read a fake newspaper article about Woodstock and its relationship to the Age of Aquarius. Your next social studies unit is on the New Left and the American Counterculture Movement. In this presentation, we're going to explore a few key aspects of the New Left and how it sprung up in the United States. But first, let's define some key terms. Counterculture is a term describing the values and norms of a cultural group that run counter to those of the social mainstream of the day, according to libre texts. The New Left was a broad range of left-wing activist movements and intellectual currents that arose in Western Europe and North America in the late 1950s and early 60s, according to Encyclopedia Britannica. The New Left was primarily made up of two camps, the radical leftist activity being adopted by civil rights leaders, and the anti-war movements being birthed at colleges and universities. In 1928, it was the global position of the Communist Party that, quote, African Americans in the South have the right to self-determination, end quote. At least that's what historian Robin Kelly told the NPR show Tell Me More in 2010. The Communist Party gained a foothold in the African American community, particularly in the South, and many prominent civil rights activists relied on the communist ideology. From W.E.B. Du Bois to Langston Hughes to Shirley Anita Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress, and even to the politics of Angela Davis today. It should be noted that Dr. King rejected communism but was still investigated by the FBI in 1962 for his ties to alleged communists, according to the King Institute at Stanford University. Leftist ideology has and continues to be a bedrock in many abolitionist and civil rights movements, and it was the civil rights movement that introduced leftism to a number of college students in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The New Left is often thought to be the point where leftism in the U.S. broke away from working-class politics, according to Louis Menard from The New Yorker. Middle-class white university students started taking up the term, the New Left, after Students for a Democratic Society published an article called Letter to the New Left by C. Wright Mills that discussed the potential of youth and intellectuals to lead revolutionary change. SDS was one of the most pivotal organizations in the New Left movement. While it didn't adhere to just one political philosophy, the organization was birthed from the League for Industrial Democracy, which had a socialist democratic philosophy. The SDS of the 1960s, the organization was refounded in 2006 as a response to the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, was primarily known for its activism on civil rights and then, post-1965, the opposition to the Vietnam War. Slogans and rallying cries such as "Make love, not war," "Burn cards, not people," and "Hell no, we won't go," were created by SDS, according to William Riggs of the First Amendment Encyclopedia. One notable absence from the SDS platform was women's liberation, according to Aliyah Higuchi in a 2013 article for Blue Stockings magazine. The women's liberation movement, according to Higuchi, started shifting public discourse around 1965 to 1969. SDS disbanded around 1970, and uprose groups such as Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, otherwise known as Witch, in 1968, and Red Stockings in 1969. From SDS also came a branch known as the Weather Underground Organization. The Weathermen were a radical group protesting government, war policies, racial unfairness, and corporate greed, according to Arthur M. Eckenstein in a 2016 article for Time magazine. The Weathermen set off 25 bombs within 7 years, primarily in government office bathrooms and corporations. The bombs never resulted in any fatalities or even major injuries. Eckenstein asserts that the organization itself was made up of about 100 key members. In the summer of 1970, the FBI placed several key members on a most wanted list and, according to Eckenstein, spent significant resources trying to hunt organizers down. The organization disbanded from 1977 to 1980, and most members simply resumed civilian lives. As a result of the groundwork laid by activist organizations like SDS, the Yippie movement sprung up in 1967, joining the fight for free speech and the anti-war movement. Quote, "The Yippies were a loosely held confederacy of anarchists, artists, and societal dropouts," Dave Roos wrote in 2020 on History.com. Roos described the Yippies as absurdists with a flair for performance art in their protest strategies. They organized a public exorcism in D.C. where they tried to lift up the Pentagon, showcased Wall Street greed by raining $100 bills onto the New York Stock Exchange, halting the trade as stockbrokers attempted to pocket the bills, and they hosted a counter-convention to the DNC with music, cannabis, and a pig they'd crowned as president. In his book, Chicago 68, David Farber states that the name Yippie was a joke made by the organizers while they were smoking cannabis. It was meant to be a play on the word hippie. On History.com's Ask Steve video series, scholar-in-residence Steve Gillian states, quote, "Yippies were hippies that were politically active," end quote. And if you look at this slide, you can see the Yippie flag right there. Yes, that is a cannabis leaf. Now that you folks know a little bit about the New Left, please break up into groups of 4 and use the rest of the class period to reflect on what you already know about 1960s/70s counterculture and politics, and reflect on how this movement might affect U.S. politics today. If there's a fact all 4 of your group members agree on, each member should write or type it down in their personal notes.